It just came out that 63% of Americans believe that the current invasion of Ukraine by Putin would not have occurred had Trump still been in office. Though the poll is somewhat biased, it is a very plausible assumption that it would not have occurred. And it could have bypassed the innocent deaths that are occurring from this war. But Trump's hypothetical involvement would lead to a much more dire fate for the people of Ukraine. We need to stop blaming Biden about the invasion as well. The only fault lies at the feet of Putin, and he and the oligarchs that support him are responsible for the deaths and disruption in Eastern Europe. No one else. Putin has wanted to regain the lands of his people since the fall of the USSR. He has expressed this numerous times. He has even indicated that through his actions over the past 2 decades. In 2008, he attempted to invade and annex the entirety of Georgia. Then in 2014, he successfully invaded and annexed Crimea from Ukraine. Putin is using the exact same template from the Russo-Georgian War that he is using currently in the Ukraine invasion. In 2008, Putin used pro-Russian sentiment to invade and protect the people of Russia and declared Abkhazia and South Ossetia independent. From there, Putin launched an assault on Greater Georgia, and after 12 days, a ceasefire was agreed to. But those 2 states are under continued Russian occupation. Fast forward to February 2022. Russia officials recognized the independence of the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. Putin moved Russian forces into those states under the guise of protection and then launched a full-fledged attack on Ukraine. It became clear that his intentions were to usurp the Ukrainian government and replace it with a puppet government loyal to Russia. But the invasion of Ukraine has far more motives than just the reestablishment of USSR states. With the advancement in technology of shale fracking and the discovery of natural gas reserves and potential oil fields in Ukraine, they could essentially become the 14th largest producer of energy in the world. Russia ranks number 2 in the world for energy production, even ahead of Saudi Arabia, and is highly, almost completely dependent on the export of its energy, and especially with its dealings with Europe. With Ukraine having better relations with Europe and talks of them joining NATO and the EU, it is a direct threat to the economic stability of Russia. Couple that with the threat of NATO's Eastern Front being directly along the Russian border, the new Ukrainian President Zelensky's openness to European relations, a Russian presidential election on the horizon, and Putin's devolution into insanity, and it's clear that his attempt to absorb Ukraine would happen no matter who the US president was. It's important to understand that both families of Biden and Trump have vested interests in Ukraine and Russia, respectively. This is why the partisan barrage in connecting both to corruption is so heated. And though both Hunter Biden's dealings with the Ukraine and Trump Organization's involvement with Russia are mired in gray areas, other than speculation, unsubstantiated claims, and hypotheticals, no laws have been breached yet for either Joe Biden or Donald Trump directly. Though the ethical implications weigh heavy, they are still just subjective. With Ukraine's potential energy jackpot, Western countries started moving in, including companies like Shell. This also gave high demand for involvement with Ukrainian natural gas holding companies like Burisma. It is in this that Hunter Biden's connections become suspect and skirt legalities, but it must be said, aside from Hunter Biden's direct involvement, there has been no known involvement in which then Vice President Biden was engaged in influencing U.S. policy based on his son's dealings. Again, the ethical implications are subjective. The current support for Ukraine by President Biden has zero connection in protecting potential interests. It is a worldwide collective in deflecting an uninstigated aggressive invasion by Putin and reinforcing an independent democratic country. And the actions imposed by the United States and countries all over the world are extremely significant. The sanctions, including SWIFT removal and bans on the Russian central bank, are the harshest we've seen. And aside from dedicating troops, this is the strongest posture we and the world can make, and something Putin didn't think Biden had the courage to do. So, would Trump's presidency change anything? Well, first, we must recognize that, like the financial involvement of the Bidens and Ukraine, there have been financial dealings with the Trump Organization and Russia. It's no secret that Trump wants to expand his real estate control in Russia, and that his organization has banking and financial interests there as well. So an economically strong Russia is extremely beneficial for the future of Trump's dealings with them. And if Ukraine becomes a challenger for energy export, and especially carves out the European market, Russia would take a tremendous blow, and future Trump involvement would not be nearly as lucrative. Again, the dealings between the two are not technically illegal, but it brings in ethical questions. And again, it's subjective. As president, Trump was inconsistent on his stance with Putin and Russia. On one hand, he approved and upheld sanctions against them, but on the other, he praised Putin, made no real posture on Crimea, interfered with weapons dealings in Ukraine, which got him impeached, and lobbied for Russia to join G7. Trump also undermined the credibility of NATO, and even expressed the possibility of the U.S. leaving the treaty. This was a significant departure from past presidents, as well as bolstering Russian incentive to challenge NATO's potency. Everything up until now has painted the picture. The rest is speculation and not points of fact. So, if Trump were president now, it is very unlikely that Putin would have taken such an aggressive approach in invading Ukraine, at least this early. It could be because Trump would be more willing to sacrifice American lives or take harsher actions, but that's unlikely. The more likely scenario is that Putin would continue to justify taking smaller regions of Ukraine. Right now, the most highly contested areas are the ones that Putin has already staked claim: Crimea and the Donbass region. It is here that most of the newly discovered natural gas and oil reserves reside. Expanding those occupied areas would eventually engulf nearly all those reserves and seize all Ukrainian Black Sea coast and its territorial waters. Trump would most likely only impose sanctions and not give much, if any, resistance to Putin's expansion, similar to how he handled Russia's involvement with Syria. NATO would most likely want to get involved, but Trump would isolate the U.S. from any actions taken, causing an even more murky relationship with our allies. Putin would continue to erode President Zelensky's administration with the continued propaganda from RT and other Russian state-controlled media outlets, and then use that misinformation as justification to commandeer the Ukrainian government. Unfortunately, as we've seen recently with Trump's response to Putin's actions being a smart, savvy peacekeeping mission, it's highly likely that he would be somewhat sympathetic to Putin's cause and dismiss or ignore ongoing actions in that region. A violent coup would unfold, and attempts on President Zelensky's life would occur. NATO would be inclined to impose harsh sanctions similar to what we are seeing now, but with Trump's financial ties, he would impose the severity of those sanctions, which would allow the continuation of Russian occupation in Ukraine. Putin's goal of establishing a puppet government would be complete, and Ukraine would be a proxy state to Russia, similar to Belarus. The country would devolve into a constant state of civil war. Thousands would die, and Putin's control would have expanded. A Trump presidency would not have been better for the Ukraine or her people. And Putin would have preferred that Trump won, because when it comes to Russia, Trump is all bark and no bite. President Biden's recommitment to NATO and Ukraine's desire to enter the treaty expedited Putin's desire to seize Ukraine through a desperate military invasion. But he did not count on the severe measures NATO and the world were willing to take, or the exemplary bravery, tenacity, and patriotism of the Ukrainians. So, pray for them if that's your thing. Support them if you can, but stay united in the protection of democracy.